Yeah, that's what I would think. Authority's always on shaky ground.
Authority tends to build itself on keeping people separated and powerless, and it's almost as if we're at war with each other.
Well, I mean, it's been brought down to the point of where at war with one another, at war with ourselves inside of our own heads. See, and now about the illusion and the reality. See, to me, this is all part of the illusion. The reality is, it's about responsibility. See, we are responsible. Physical, spirit, human being. So we are responsible as physical spirits, as human beings. We are responsible to life. See, that's what it is. But we live in these authority systems of power that tell us and condition us to blame. They condition us with guilt, sin, and blame. And with that conditioning, then you're always the blamer. See, it's never your it's never one's responsibility. Carry the guilt, carry it all. See, but in the end, see that even that whole concept is like to feel guilty, to live lives dominated. Because, I mean, what always threw me off is that we're guilty for being here.
The moment we're born.
Yeah. That's insane. You know? But once we, again, their definition, but once we go by that technologic definition, then already our recognition of self is being attacked. And it conditions us to not take responsibility. It conditions us to blame, very minimally blame ourselves or someone else. But it does not teach us about responsibility. See, because if you feel even about guilt, see, we have to blame ourselves. See, and it's not about that. It's about responsibility and learning from the things that we go through. But it's about responsibility.
So this might be the next logical question, and probably a lot harder to answer, but where does one go, or how does one take up the search to find what is real, or is reality?
You find your own reality, man. You got a mind. You know, you have creative. We all have creative. We are all creative. It's just that we use too much of our creative process, our creative ability, irresponsibly. We use it on a daily basis to create, again, what our insecurity and our fears are. And I think that if we make conscious effort to spend part of that time using our creative ability differently, the same way we would learn to do anything, so we have to tell our mind to do this, right? But start to use that creative part of us in a different way. And we should never lie to ourselves. Never.
Never.
About who we are, what we're capable of. We should never lie to ourselves. We should always tell ourselves the truth, even if we don't like those truths.
Absolutely.
But we should always tell ourselves the truth. Because if we don't do that, how can we define our own basis of reality? And I think that we just head off, you know.
One of the things that seems to be so predominant right now is this other concept I just want to ask you to talk about for a minute. And then there's some other things I want to maybe talk about here, and in a little while we'll open the phone lines. I'm sure some of our listeners maybe would like to have some questions or comments for you. Fear, John. I do interviews every week with different types of guests, anywhere from psychologists to healers to business people to environmentalists to experts on the criminal justice system, and fear always comes up in the interview, that right now the world as we buy into, or the world exists, is so fear-filled.
That's because the people in that world don't know who they are. Their spirit is being eaten upon. Their individual collective spirit is being fed upon. It is the energy that runs the authoritarian system. So they don't, some of them are more obedient than others and more well-behaved than others and have their respectabilities and irrespectabilities in the different stratas of a society. But generally speaking, the society at large is not happy with itself. It's the fear. I mean, the system is run on fear. Think about the guilt, sin, and blame. Fear. It's run on. I mean, you gotta fear your God. You gotta fear your Lucifer. So what's the difference? Right? And it's fear. Fear is a natural human feeling, and it's not a frivolous feeling. So but there's a time, but there also becomes a point when it's no longer fear, and it's just mass paranoia. And it's not really fear. Fear is when your heart jumps right in your throat because it just does. Fear is when it just spins and turns inside of you and your blood is running into itself. Fear is something that's very, very real. That's fear. I mean, there is fear. But then there is this collective paranoia, and that's what I think it is, more than it is fear. But it has a nice, convenient little turn. But there's this collective paranoia. Let's go back to the tribes. The people of America, they are the children of the tribes of Europe. And when they were still the tribes of Europe, they worshipped the earth as the mother and had an entirely different perception of reality. And that perception was to keep the harmony and the balance as much as possible. And somewhere historically in time, there appeared the dominator theory of God. And this dominator theory of God is that God was a male and everything was subservient. And this theory used its technology and its culture to make weapons of destruction, to improve the weapons of killing. The tribes then had this imposed upon them through fear. This isn't that. Anyway, as the tribes were broken down through the various phases of the technologic civilizations, whether it was through the Romans or whoever it was, as that was all evolving, the tribes were attacked and made to give up the ways of the earth and submit to the new God. Now, this happened to the Europeans before it happened to us. But what happened to us happened to the European children of the tribes also. But it happened maybe 800 years before it happened to us. And actually, in its own form and at a particular time within civilization, when the Europeans came to the Western Hemisphere, Europe was going through the Inquisition. And the Inquisition was basically the church establishing authority over the people of the earth, establishing authority. And they had like 500 years of Inquisition. And in the Inquisition, and women were special targets because they were trying to erase that tribal memory of the earth as the mother and things. But the deal was that if you were accused of speaking against the church, you were automatically guilty, and they had to torture you. And you had to tell them all the names you could give them. And you would, because of the ways that they tortured. And they seized all your property. 500 years of this. Because prior to that, the people were coexisting in some manner or fashion with the religious authorities, see, but they were still praying to their own, they were still. closer to their tribal ancestry.